before Season 2 of House of the Dragon aired, when rumours first started to appear that fan favourite Dragonseed Nettles had been cut from the show, with Rhaena claiming Sheepstealer instead, many fans were unhappy about this proposed change. Now, don't get me wrong, there were some who were okay with it, maybe even happy, but the general mood of the fanbase seemed to be quite down on this idea. Now, I never doubted this rumour, as it came from one of the very few leakers that has earned my trust, and the only one I really give the time of day to. But even knowing all of that, I know many still hoped that when the season aired, it would have turned out to be some kind of misdirection or bluff. But it did become clear as the season progressed that Nettles had indeed been cut, with Rhaena taking up some of her role. And look, yes, the final shots of Rhaena and Sheepstealer in the season finale were left ambiguous as to what may happen in season 3, with us yet to actually see Rhaena claim the wild dragon. But let's be real for a moment, unless this is some huge bluff, with Ryan Condal just testing the waters to see how people felt about the idea, then I think it's more likely than not that Nettles will not be appearing in House of the Dragon. Which is, well, sad. The thing is, swapping Rhaena for Nettles is not a simple thing to do, which is actually a narrative I've seen many people running with over the last few weeks. The issue is you can't give Rhaena the whole of Nettles' role in the narrative. Yes, there are some parts which can work, but there are other key roles that Nettles has in the story that Rhaena can just not fulfill. In this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into Nettles, why I think she has been cut, the positives and negatives of Rhaena taking her role, and how I believe that other aspects of Nettles' role that don't fit Rhaena could be given to another character, which I believe has already had the groundwork laid for during Season 2. For me, Nettles stands out among the Dragonseeds because of the frankly more interesting way she claims her dragon. Rather than just jumping on and praying, she earns Sheepstealer's trust slowly over time. You have the other aspects, which is while, like most of the Dragonseeds, she is technically common-born, unlike Adam, Ulf, and Hugh, she's remarkably un-Valyrian, which brings into question as to if she has any Valyrian blood at all. It makes her claiming a dragon a little bit more interesting. So before we really dive into this discussion, I just want to give a quick rundown of her character, as described in Fire and Blood. Nettles was a small and skinny brown girl, with black hair and brown eyes, crooked teeth and a scarred nose, with very few men calling her pretty. She was also described as foul-mouthed and fearless. Her birth was very uncertain, but some sources suggest she was born to a dockside whore and grew up homeless in Spicetown and Hull on Driftmark. Nettles would fight valiantly on the behalf of Rhaenyra Targaryen during the Dance of the Dragons after claiming the wild dragon Sheepstealer, and was a key part of the Battle of the Gullet in 130 AC. While her fellow Dragonseeds Hugh Hammer and Ulf White celebrated after the battle, Nettles was tearful, perhaps upset of the death of Jacaerys, as well as the destruction of Spicetown and the butchering of its people. Other than how she claimed her dragon, the most compelling part of Nettles' story is how it actually relates to Daemon Targaryen, who she follows to the Riverlands while he hunts down Aemond Targaryen and Vhagar along the Trident to put a stop to their reign of terror. The pair would use Maidenpool as a base, returning there every night. Now, there are some sources that suggest Daemon had fallen in love with Nettles and had taken her as a paramour, while others suggest, while the two were indeed close, they slept in adjoining bedrooms and ate together each evening and morning, with Maidenpool's maester suggesting that Daemon doted on Nettles as he would a daughter, with Daemon teaching her common courtesies and giving her fine gifts, such as an ivory hairbrush and a silvered looking glass, a velvet satin cloak and leather riding boots. After the treason of the Dragonseeds Ulf White and Hugh Hammer at Tumbleton, Lady Mysaria, known as the White Worm, Daemon's lover of old, fed Queen Rhaenyra's growing distrust of the Dragonseeds that were left to her, with rumours of Nettles and Daemon's close relationship, which is said to have enraged Rhaenyra. The Queen sent a raven to Manfred Moodin, Lord of Maidenpool, and ordered him to deliver Nettles' head, but not to do Daemon any harm, only to tell him to return to King's Landing. According to Maester Norrin, Maidenpool's maester, Manfred and his advisors were fearful of how Daemon slept near Nettles, and were unwilling to kill a guest, let alone a young girl. They disobeyed the Queen and followed Norrin's advice, and pretended they had never received the letter. When Maester Norrin informed Daemon that Rhaenyra had declared Nettles a traitor, Daemon would recognise Mysaria's actions in Rhaenyra's words, and thank the Maester for his warning, before he allowed Nettles to escape the next morning. It is unknown how the two spent their last night together, but we do know at dawn, Daemon helped Nettles saddle Sheepstealer one final time, before Nettles tearfully flew into the morning mist of the Bay of Crabs. According to Norrin, no word of farewell was spoken between the pair, but as Sheepstealer flew away, Caraxes is said to have let out a scream that shattered all the windows in Jonquil's tower. That same day, Daemon did not return to his wife Rhaenyra in King's Landing, but publicly announced his departure for Harrenhal, where he would perish fighting Rhaena Targaryen in the battle above the God's Eye. Since Daemon's body was never found in the God's Eye, there are some songs which claim he survived the encounter and found his way back to Nettles. Rhaenyra was enraged by the disappearance of Nettles and her husband's betrayal. It very much is suggested in the text that Nettles fled to the Vale, where she hid in the mountains with Sheepstealer, becoming the infamous Fire Witch of the Burn Men. Okay, so we've now established who Nettles is, and the wider view of her role in the story, but why was she cut from House of the Dragon? Well, the unfortunate truth is, it's unlikely we'll ever have an official answer as to why, but that doesn't mean we can't figure out some of the reasons. Back when the leaks regarding Nettles first came out, the idea many fans latched onto was the writers were not keen on the idea of Daemon having an affair and cheating on Rhaenyra, with many fans pointing to showrunner Ryan Condal's personal love for the pairing of Daemon and Rhaenyra as evidence. Built into this idea was also a suggestion that the writers were also not too keen on the age gap in the proposed relationship between Daemon and Nettles. I never personally put much stock in this idea, namely because the show in season 1 was perfectly happy with this kind of age gap relationship, not just once, but twice. Why would it be different in future seasons? But the core issue with both of the ideas here is they work on the assumption that having Daemon and Nettles as lovers was the only option, when in fact, as we've discussed prior, the relationship could very well have been platonic. As with any instance where a beloved character or story element gets cut from an adaptation, the most common logic is it was to slim down the cast and narrative to save time. And while yes, this may have very well been the case, we can't really prove that. In fact, the reason I don't think this was the case is simply because the structure and narrative of season 2 would have in fact benefited having Nettles in it. The truth is, we will never know why Nettles has been cut, unless Ryan Condal outwardly says why. But given what they have done during season 2 with Nettles' story, we can make an educated guess. Part of it may have been a time issue, thus merging Nettles with Rhaena might seem very appealing to a writer who both save time and give Rhaena much more to do than the little she does in the books. Now, after season 1, there was definitely a large call from within the fanbase and mainstream media to give both Baela and Rhaena more active roles in the story. It's understandable why they did so little during the back end of season 1, given how the focus of the narrative by this point is more around the politics of the death of Viserys and the underlying tensions between the factions. But clearly, there was a section of the fans who felt both of Daemon's daughters should have been given more screen time, and clearly Ryan Condal agrees with this sentiment. Now, this is easier said than done. For Baela, it's really not too much of an issue, given how she can be used to interact with Jace's story and the general Dragonstone politics, but finding things for Rhaena to do, with it fitting into the context of her book plot, is much harder. Rhaena really does very little during this time period in the books, and frankly, the whole war. She gets sent to the Vale as a ward of Jane Arryn, and very much is sidelined for the rest of the story. Inventing a whole new plotline for her while keeping the structural integrity of the narrative is challenging. But here's the thing. If you tweak some of the elements of a proposed Nettles Season 2 arc and give them to Rhaena, there are ways to make her a more active part of the story. Now, we can sit here and debate if Rhaena should have been given an expanded story for ages if you really want to, but honestly, it's beyond the scope of this video. But what is important to this analysis is the writers very much thought that she did. By changing Sheepstealer's location to the Vale, and a few throwaway lines about wild dragons in the mountains, having to look further than Dragonstone for food because of the war, and there we have it, our merged Nettles and Rhaena storyline set up and ready to go. The truth is, there definitely is some parts of Rhaena as a character that could work well within what we know about Nettles' story, while at the same time there are many parts that just flat out don't work. Let's start with some of the reasons Rhaena works for Nettles' story. Well, given with how they characterised Rhaena in Season 1 and her inability to hatch or claim a dragon, having her be the one to claim a dragon in an unconventional way, such as Nettles did, kind of fits quite well. But more importantly, the way her relationship with Daemon is strained and distant, with Rhaena outwardly questioning if her father loves her sister more because she has a dragon, really playing well into the Nettles character arc. Rhaena claiming Sheepstealer, then following her father to the Riverlands where they will bond and become closer, works well as a character arc for both Rhaena and Daemon. Now, something a lot of fans point to as a reason why Rhaena taking Nettles' role is the version of events where Nettles and Daemon were lovers, but it's key to recall this is one version of the events. It is the most popular among fans by far, but not the only version we have. The other, where the relationship is more platonic, a father and daughter bond, would fit quite well, with Rhaena taking Nettles' role and her becoming closer to her father. The other issue often brought up is the fact that in Fire and Blood, Rhaena hatches her own dragon while in a Vale, a dragon she calls Morning. Come the end of the Dance of the Dragons, it's one of the very few left alive. Some have pointed out how can Rhaena claim Sheepstealer and hatch Morning. Well, I think it's quite simple. I just don't think we're going to get Morning, and I suspect the show will find some way of killing Sheepstealer, or hell, maybe they will pull a Rhaenor and Seasmoke where Rhaena just abandons him, which doesn't really make sense. Regardless, I'm sure the writers will find some convoluted reason to make it make sense within the context of the show. But here's the thing, while there are some aspects in Nettles' story that do fit well within Rhaena, there are some huge parts of her arc that just don't, and we're not just talking small issues here. Small issues that you can just write around, but issues that would have a knock-on effect with other characters' stories and the narrative as a whole. Mysaria, the White Worm, the former lover of Daemon Targaryen, becomes the Master of Whispers for Rhaenyra after the fall of King's Landing. Now, after the betrayal of the Dragonseeds at Templeton, Rhaenyra becomes very distrustful of her remaining Dragonseeds, Adam and Nettles. This is then made worse by Mysaria, who stokes Rhaenyra's growing paranoia, claiming to Rhaenyra that Daemon had been sleeping with Nettles during their time at Maidenpool. Now, in Fire and Blood, whether the rumours of a sexual relationship between Nettles and Daemon is true or not doesn't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. My take is it's just as likely it was platonic. What's important here is Rhaenyra has no trust anymore in the Dragonseeds, and thus Nettles, so she does believe the claim of Mysaria, with this all resulting in Rhaenyra ordering Nettles' death. Now, if you've been paying attention, you can see the problem here. How does this work if Rhaena takes Nettles' role? Are we really going to go down the path that Rhaenyra would not trust her own stepdaughter and order her death? Expect Daemon to execute his own child to prove his loyalty to her, and that's not even taking into the fact you would have to believe that Daemon and Rhaena were lovers, which even for House of the Dragon might be one incestuous relationship too far, and not something that I think would ever happen. The issue is, House of the Dragon just cannot ignore this part of the story. Rhaenyra's reaction and treatment of the Dragonseeds is a key pillar in her mental decline towards the end of the war. It's one of the huge missteps by Rhaenyra that badly costs her and very much impacted how events played out. It fuels Adam's drive to want to prove him and his brother loyal, and thus his actions at the Second Templeton. It arguably loses Rhaenyra a dragon in Nettles and Sheepstealer. It pushes Daemon towards his confrontation with Aemond at Harrenhal. So while this might seem like a minor thing, it really does have a huge impact in how the story takes shape. So how can we make this element of the story work? Well, a solution that works when it comes to Adam is you could still have Rhaenyra mistrust him given his bastard origin. But the issue is it does not mesh well with Rhaenyra as a character in the show, or her relationship with Adam. I guess to get around it, you could have her believe he actively betrayed her along with Ulf and Hugh at Templeton, with Mysaria spreading this information. A more boring and simple solution to the end of Daemon and Nettles' arc in the Riverlands is rather than Rhaenyra call for Rhaena's head, Daemon sends her her away for her own safety as he prepares to face Aemond, rather than Rhaenyra's erratic accusations being a factor in his choice to 1v1 Aemond. I suspect the writers could go with the angle that he's simply doing it for the greater good, given his weirwood visions of the Long Night and Aegon's prophecy, as we saw in the season finale of season 2. He knows the role he has to play, that's why he sends Rhaena away. So while it's not exactly elegant, there are still some ways you can make it work, even if it's very convoluted. But there's one more wildcard in play when it comes to Rhaena and Nettles that is also worth a quick mention: Mysaria. While it's very clear that by giving Nettles his role in the story to Rhaena, as much as we try and force it to fit, there are going to be elements that just don't. But that doesn't mean they cannot adjust these elements and have them somewhere else in the story that makes a little bit more sense. So let's take a quick moment to talk about Mysaria and see how in the show she might be able to take up some of Nettles' role that no longer fits Rhaena. First and foremost, it's important to remember Mysaria in the show versus the book are very different characters. Yes, her relationship with Daemon is similar, and while being a whore turned spymaster does fall in line with the book, in terms of her motivation, well, it's much less clear, especially with her relationship with Rhaenyra in the show changing the dynamic between them a great deal when compared to the book. It's very much Mysaria in the book who stokes the fire of Rhaenyra's declining mental health and thus poor decision making. She convinced Rhaenyra of Nettles' relationship with Daemon. She even lowers Adam of Hull's standing so much Rhaenyra orders Corlys Velaryon arrested. Mysaria's motivation really is not clear in the book, where in the show they are seemingly slightly more clear, with her seemingly wishing for a fairer world and a better treatment for the small folk. Her close relationship with Rhaenyra, I think, might be the key in giving Mysaria some of Nettles' storyline. I still think Mysaria will push for the deaths of the Dragonseeds, except Rhaena, because in the context of the show, it doesn't make sense for her to do that. You could maybe have Rhaenyra start to mistrust Mysaria, her closest advisor. Maybe Mysaria and Daemon grow closer after the fall of King's Landing, and rather than Mysaria die in the Moon of Madness, she could in fact be one of the masterminds and instigators behind it, perhaps also taking the role of the brothel madam who crowns Gaemon Powhair, or something similar to that effect. While not exactly following the suspected relationship with Daemon part of Nettles' storyline exactly, you can still use the Daemon aspect to reframe what the portrayal is. The Moon of Madness and Mysaria being an instigator within it, then leading to the Dragon Pit, Joffrey's fate, and Rhaenyra fleeing the city. You then push Mysaria's death back to the Hour of the Wolf, where you have Corlys as a witness to her actions, and Cregan Stark more happy to dispense justice. I think it would kind of be a cool idea to have both Larys and Mysaria executed together, both spymasters whom cause bloodshed for their own self-interest dying together, or something maybe to that effect, maybe for the idea of the greater good. The idea of Mysaria taking some of the themes of Nettles' role that don't fit Rhaena all hinge on one thing. Is Mysaria being honest about her past and her intentions? Does she really have a deep care for Rhaenyra as presented in the show? Is this bond that becomes almost romantic legitimate? Or is this Mysaria, the White Worm, playing the long game? The idea of her fighting for the betterment of the small folk and maybe instigating the Moon of Madness does kind of track with what we saw of her in season 1, specifically when she's dealing with Otto Hightower in the aftermath of Viserys' death. So a twist like this wouldn't be coming out of nowhere. Here's the thing, I am a book fan first and foremost. I would always rather the show stick as close to the books as they can. So yeah, when the idea of Rhaena taking the role of Nettles first got leaked, I wasn't thrilled. But when I turn on the screenwriter part of me, I can see how in the context of the TV show, giving Rhaena Nettles' arc does take shape and does work for the most part, albeit with some significant changes made to parts of it. I can very much see why to the writers, giving Rhaena much more to do is appealing, but what we have to weigh up here is the cost benefit of it. In this case, the cost is Nettles. It's clear that George R. R. Martin is not at all happy about this change, which given George's positive reaction to the changes made during season 1 does raise some eyebrows. But I've always tried to approach subject matters such as this with a balanced view, and I'm willing to see where the show goes with this before I pass judgment too harshly. But I would be lying if I did not admit I was concerned. The writers are on very thin ice with a large portion of the fans right now, even even the fans more willing to give them a chance. Cutting Nettles in favour of giving Rhaena more to do might very well end up one of the better changes the show has made. Because let's face it, not every change from the source material is bad. Viserys in season 1 proves this. But at the same time, given Nettles was a fan favourite character, well, if this goes poorly, the damage could be severe.